This happened in October of 2022, right around the middle of the month, when the leaves had just turned that perfect shade of orange and red. I was 28 at the time, working as a property manager for a company that handled several apartment complexes throughout northern Vermont. Some details are a bit fuzzy since it's been 3 years, but the important parts, those I'll never forget. My job required me to do routine inspections of vacant units, especially during fall when we'd winterize properties to prevent pipe damage. October 14th was a Friday, and I had 3 units to check at our oldest complex. The place was built in the 1970s, tucked away on a dead-end road surrounded by thick forest. By mid-October, most of the summer residents had already left, making the 24-unit complex feel like a ghost town. I arrived around 4 p.m., later than planned because my previous inspection had complications with a leak. The sun sets early in Vermont during fall, and the shadows between the buildings were already growing long. I remember the smell of decomposing leaves mixed with that distinct autumn dampness as I walked to Building C, the furthest one from the parking lot. Unit C8 was my first stop. The previous tenant, an elderly woman named Dorothy, had passed away 6 weeks earlier. Her family had cleared out most of her belongings, but the unit still needed inspection before we could list it. I unlocked the door and was immediately hit by this odd smell. Not death or decay, but something chemical. Like bleach mixed with something sweet. The apartment was mostly empty except for some furniture the family didn't want. An old brown couch sat against the living room wall, and a wooden dining table occupied the small eating area. The blinds were all drawn shut, casting the rooms in this depressing yellow glow from the one ceiling light that still worked. I started my inspection in the kitchen, checking under the sink for leaks. That's when I heard it, a creaking sound from somewhere deeper in the apartment. Old buildings make noise, especially when the temperature drops in the evening, so I didn't think much of it initially. I made notes about some water damage under the sink and moved to check the bedroom. The hallway leading to the bedroom was narrow, maybe 3 feet wide. Faded wallpaper with a pattern of autumn leaves, ironic given the season, peeled at the corners. As I walked down the hall, that chemical smell got stronger. The bedroom door was closed, which was odd since I distinctly remembered the family leaving all interior doors open for ventilation. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room was dark, the blinds here drawn so tight that barely any light filtered through. I fumbled for the light switch on the wall. The overhead fixture flickered once, twice, then stayed on, revealing what I can only describe as bizarre. Someone had been living in this room recently. A sleeping bag lay unrolled in the corner, still inflated with an air mattress underneath. Empty food containers, mostly canned goods and energy bar wrappers, were stacked neatly against the wall. But what made my stomach tighten was the collection of photographs spread across the floor near the sleeping bag. They were all of the building's current tenants. Some were taken through windows. Others showed people getting mail or walking to their cars. There must have been 40 or 50 photos. I pulled out my phone to call the police, but of course there was no signal. That area had always been a dead zone. I'd have to get back to my car to make the call. I took a few quick photos of the scene with my phone and turned to leave. That's when I heard the bathroom door down the hall slowly creak open. I froze. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. The hallway suddenly felt even narrower than before. From where I stood, I couldn't see the bathroom, just the darkness of the hall stretching toward it. "Maintenance!" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. "Anyone there?" No response, just the sound of my own breathing. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the bathroom toward the bedroom where I stood. I looked around frantically for another exit, but the only window in the bedroom had been painted shut years ago. The footsteps stopped just outside the bedroom door, barely out of my line of sight. We stood there in complete silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 seconds. I could see a shadow on the hallway wall. Someone was definitely standing there, just around the corner. Finally, I decided I had to move. I gripped my clipboard like a weapon, took a deep breath, and rushed out into the hallway. A man stood there, maybe 6 feet from me. He was wearing dark work clothes, like a janitor's uniform, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. What struck me most were his hands. They were covered in thick yellow rubber gloves, the kind you'd use for serious cleaning. That explained the chemical smell. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "I'm the property manager," I managed to say, holding up my clipboard with the company logo like it was some kind of shield. "This unit is supposed to be vacant." He tilted his head slightly. "Dorothy said I could stay." "Dorothy's been dead for 6 weeks," I said. He smiled then, and something about that smile made me want to run immediately. "I know," he said. "I was here when it happened." My mind raced. Dorothy had been found after a neighbor complained about newspapers piling up. The coroner said she'd been dead for several days, maybe a week. Natural causes, they'd determined. Heart failure. "I need you to leave," I said, trying to sound authoritative. "Now, or I'm calling the police." He reached into his pocket slowly, and I tensed, ready to run or fight. But he just pulled out a key, an apartment key. "Dorothy gave this to me," he said, "for helping her with things. Shopping, cleaning." He gestured with those yellow-gloved hands. "I'm very good at cleaning." The way he said it made my skin crawl. I backed up slowly toward the living room, keeping my eyes on him. He didn't follow immediately, just watched me retreat. "I'll go," he said finally. "But I need to pack my things." I nodded, still backing away. "You have 10 minutes. I'll be right outside." I practically ran out of the apartment and down to the parking lot. My hands were shaking as I got in my car and locked the doors. I called 911 immediately, explaining the situation. They said they'd send someone right away. But right away in rural Vermont could mean 20 minutes or more. I kept my eyes on the building entrance, but I never saw him leave. After about 5 minutes, I noticed movement in one of the ground floor windows of Building A, a curtain pulling back slightly. Someone was watching me. The curtain fell back into place when they realized I'd spotted them. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Finally, a police cruiser pulled into the lot. I explained everything to the officer, and we went back up to C8 together. The apartment was empty. The sleeping bag, the photographs, all the food containers. Everything was gone. Even that chemical smell had faded. The only sign anyone had been there was the bedroom door, still open like I'd left it, and some moisture on the bathroom floor, like someone had mopped it recently. The officer took my report, but seemed skeptical until I showed him the photos on my phone. He called for backup, and they searched the entire complex. They found evidence that someone had been accessing multiple vacant units. Scratches on locks, missing items that hadn't been noticed before. And in one basement storage room, they found a makeshift dark room with developing equipment and more photographs. They never caught the man. The police theorized he'd been living in the complex for months, maybe longer, moving between vacant units and studying the residents. The photographs they recovered showed some tenants dating back over a year, including several of Dorothy before she died. The part that haunts me most came from the detective a week later. They'd reviewed Dorothy's case more carefully. While she did die of heart failure, they found something the original examination had missed: a small injection site on her neck, barely visible. The toxicology report had been basic since it was assumed to be natural causes, but a more thorough test revealed traces of potassium chloride in her system. Not enough to definitively prove murder, but enough to stop a weak heart. I quit that job 2 months later. I still dream about that smile sometimes. And those yellow rubber gloves. The complex management company installed new locks and security cameras, but 3 more tenants moved out within the month. Last I heard, they were having trouble keeping the place fully occupied. Can't say I blame people. Even now, 2 years later, whenever I smell that mix of bleach and something sweet, I think about what that man said. I'm very good at cleaning. I still wonder how many other natural deaths he might have helped along, and whether Dorothy really did give him that key, or if he just took it after. October 2021 was when this nightmare happened. I was 31, divorced for about a year, and had just moved back to my childhood town in Michigan with my 8-year-old daughter, Liz. We'd found a decent rental house on Oakwood Street, right near the elementary school. The neighborhood was older but safe, full of mature trees that looked absolutely gorgeous in fall. Liz was having a hard time adjusting to the new school and didn't have many friends yet. So when Halloween approached, I was determined to make it special for her. She wanted to be a witch, not a scary one, but a pretty witch with sparkles, as she put it. I spent way too much money on her costume, but seeing her face light up made it worth it. October 30th was a Saturday, and the neighborhood was doing its annual Harvest Walk. Basically trick-or-treating the night before Halloween so kids could do both if they wanted. It started at 6 p.m., right as dusk was setting in. Liz was so excited she could barely eat dinner. We started with the houses on our street. Liz was shy at first, but after a few houses she got into it. Her little treat bucket was filling up quickly. Around 7 p.m. we reached the end of our street, where it connected to a busier road. There was a house there I'd noticed before, a 2-story colonial with peeling white paint and an overgrown yard. No decorations, porch light off. Clearly not participating. But as we passed, I noticed someone standing in the second-floor window, barely visible through the sheer curtains. They were just standing there, watching the kids go by. It gave me a weird feeling, but I figured some people just like to watch the festivities without participating. We turned onto the next street, where the houses went all out with decorations. Liz was having a blast. Around 7:30, I noticed a man walking behind us, maybe 30 feet back. He was wearing regular clothes, jeans and a dark hoodie, no costume, no kid with him either. Just walking alone, carrying a plastic shopping bag. At first, I thought maybe he was just heading home, but after we'd hit 5 more houses, he was still there, maintaining that same distance. When we crossed to the other side of the street, so did he. When we stopped for Liz to tie her shoe, he stopped too, pretending to check his phone. I pulled Liz closer and whispered for her to stay right next to me. We picked up our pace, hitting houses quicker, but he matched our speed. The shopping bag he carried looked heavy, swinging slightly as he walked. I could hear something inside it clinking softly. We turned onto another street, hoping to lose him. This street was less busy, fewer porch lights on. Bad choice. Now it was just us and him on a darker street. My heart was racing. I pulled out my phone to call 911 but hesitated. What would I say? A man was walking on public streets during trick-or-treating? Then Liz said something that made my blood run cold. "Mommy, that man was at my school yesterday." I looked back. He was closer now, maybe 20 feet. The streetlight caught his face for a moment. Thin, pale, probably mid-40s, with hollow cheeks and dark circles under his eyes. He saw me looking and smiled, raising his hand in a small wave. We were 3 blocks from home. I picked up Liz, costume and all, and started walking fast. She was confused, asking what was wrong. I told her we needed to get home for a bathroom break. Behind us, I heard his footsteps speed up too. There was a house ahead with tons of parents and kids in the front yard. I practically ran to it, joining the crowd. I turned to look. He had stopped at the edge of the property, just standing on the sidewalk, watching. One of the other moms noticed my expression and asked if I was okay. "That man," I said, pointing. "He's been following us." She looked, and her face changed. "Oh my God, that's the guy," she said. She called to her husband and a few other dads. "That's the man the school sent the email about." I'd been so busy with the move, I hadn't checked Liz's school emails in days. Apparently, a man matching his description had been seen taking photos of kids during recess, standing just outside the fence. When confronted by staff, he'd run off. 3 dads started walking toward him. He immediately turned and walked quickly back the way he'd come, that shopping bag bouncing against his leg. One of the dads called the police while another followed him to get a license plate if he got in a car. The police showed up within 10 minutes. They took statements from several parents. Turns out 2 other families had noticed him following them earlier in the evening. The dad who'd followed him said he disappeared into that rundown house, the one where I'd seen someone watching from the window. The police went to check it out while we all waited. Liz was scared now, clinging to me. I felt terrible that her special night had been ruined. After about 20 minutes, the officers came back. The house was empty, they said, but they'd found evidence someone had been squatting there. Mattresses in 2 rooms, food wrappers, and disturbingly, a wall covered in printed photos of kids from around the neighborhood. Photos taken from a distance, some at the school, some at the park, some from previous Halloween events. In that shopping bag he'd been carrying, they found zip ties, duct tape, and a bottle of chloroform. They put out an alert but never found him that night. The next day, Halloween, police patrolled the neighborhood heavily. Most parents kept their kids home. We spent the evening watching movies and eating Liz's candy from the night before, but she kept asking if the man would come back. 3 days later, they arrested him trying to break into an elementary school 2 towns over at 2 a.m. He had a record, attempted kidnapping in Ohio 5 years earlier, served 3 years, had just been released 6 months ago. He'd been living in that abandoned house for 2 months, watching the neighborhood kids, learning their routines. At his trial, which I attended, they revealed more evidence from the house. He had detailed notes about several children, including Liz. He knew what time she walked to school, which playground equipment she preferred, even what she'd brought for lunch some days. He'd been planning something for Halloween, when kids would be out after dark, separated from groups, distracted by fun. Liz is in middle school now, but she still doesn't like Halloween. We moved to a different neighborhood the following month, one with better lighting and an active neighborhood watch. I check those school emails religiously now. And every October, when I see parents out with their kids trick-or-treating, I find myself scanning the sidewalks for lone adults with no children, carrying bags they shouldn't have. The detective told me later that if we hadn't noticed him, if those parents hadn't recognized him, that Halloween could have ended very differently for some families. Liz and I might have been 3 blocks from home, but we were seconds from something horrible. That's what keeps me up sometimes, how close we came to being a true crime documentary instead of a cautionary tale. This happened in November 2020, during peak COVID when everything felt surreal already. I was 26, living alone in my first apartment in Portland, Oregon. It was a studio on the 3rd floor of an old building. Nothing fancy, but it had character. Exposed brick walls, vintage radiator heating, and a fire escape that I'd turned into a tiny garden. November in Portland means rain, darkness by 4:30 p.m., and that constant dampness that seeps into everything. I was working from home, barely leaving except for groceries. The isolation was getting to me, so I'd started taking evening walks just to feel human again, even if the streets were mostly empty. November 15th was a Sunday. I remember because I'd just finished a video call with my parents. Around 7 p.m., I decided to take my usual walk. The rain had stopped, leaving that fresh, earthy smell in the air. The streets were slick with wet leaves, orange and brown mush that made every step careful. My normal route took me through Laurelhurst Park, about 6 blocks from my apartment. With the early darkness and COVID, the park was completely deserted. The street lamps created these pools of yellow light with vast shadows between them. I actually liked the emptiness. It felt peaceful after being cooped up all day. I was about halfway through the park when I noticed someone else on the path behind me. Another lone walker, maybe 50 feet back. Nothing unusual. Plenty of people had taken up walking during lockdown. I continued on, listening to a podcast through one earbud, keeping the other ear free for safety. But something felt off about the person behind me. Their pace was weird, not quite matching mine, but never falling further behind either. When I'd speed up slightly, they'd speed up. When I'd slow down, they'd slow down. After about 5 minutes of this, I pulled out my phone, pretending to text while using the black screen to look behind me. It was a man in a long dark coat, hood up. He was carrying something in his right hand, holding it against his leg. I couldn't make out what it was. I decided to test something. There was a fork in the path ahead. I took the left path, which led toward the duck pond. Sure enough, he took the left path too. My stomach tightened. The pond area was even more isolated, surrounded by thick trees. I picked up my pace, no longer pretending to be casual. The path around the pond was narrow, with water on one side and dense bushes on the other. Stupid choice. I could hear his footsteps getting closer. No longer matching my pace, but gaining on me. There was a small bridge ahead that crossed over to the other side of the pond. As soon as I crossed it and was out of his sightline behind some trees, I ducked off the path and crouched behind a large rhododendron bush. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure he'd hear it. His footsteps approached the bridge, then stopped. Complete silence for maybe 10 seconds. Then I heard him call out, "I know you're there. Just wanted to return your wallet." My hand went to my pocket. My wallet was there. I stayed frozen, not moving, barely breathing. He laughed. This quiet, unpleasant sound. "Worth a try," he said. His footsteps started again, crossing the bridge slowly. Through the gaps in the leaves, I could see him stop on the other side, looking around. What he was holding was clearer now. It looked like a hammer or small hatchet. He stood there for what felt like forever, just listening. Then he continued down the path, disappearing around the bend. I waited another 5 minutes before moving, then carefully made my way back the way I'd come, staying off the main path, pushing through bushes and getting soaked from the wet vegetation. When I finally reached the park entrance, I ran the 6 blocks home, not stopping until I was inside my building. I called the police from my apartment. They took a report over the phone but seemed skeptical. A man walking in a public park wasn't illegal, even if he was carrying something. Without an actual threat or assault, there wasn't much they could do. They said they'd send a patrol through the park. I didn't leave my apartment for 3 days after that. When I finally did, it was only for essential groceries, and I was hyper-vigilant the entire time. I stopped taking evening walks altogether. 2 weeks later, I saw a news story that made me physically sick. A woman had been attacked around 8 p.m. She'd been hit from behind with what police described as a blunt instrument, but managed to scream and fight back. Her attacker fled when another jogger came running to help. She survived but had serious head injuries. The police released a description. Male, approximately 5'10", wearing a dark coat with a hood. The woman said he'd followed her through the park before attacking near the duck pond, the exact area where I'd hidden. They never caught him. I checked the news obsessively for months. There were 2 more similar attacks in Portland parks that winter, both women walking alone in the evening. Both survived, thankfully, but the attacker was never identified. I moved apartments the following January to a place nowhere near any parks. Even now, 3 years later, I don't walk alone after dark, ever. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts, if I'd kept walking that path around the pond. That 10-second pause when he stopped on the bridge, listening for me. I think he knew exactly where I was hiding. I think he chose to keep walking, to wait for an easier target. The thing that haunts me most is his voice when he said, "Worth a try." It was so casual, almost amused. Like this was a game he played often. Like he'd tried that wallet lie before, and maybe sometimes it worked. Every fall when the leaves start turning and the darkness comes early, I wonder if he's still out there, walking those park paths, looking for someone alone.